Rights or entitlements? On Monday, September 17, 1787, 41 of these delegates solemnly met in the East Room of the Independence Hall for the signing. As the convention was coming to a close, George Mason rose to his feet and said, "I would rather cut off my right hand than to put it to this document." But Colonel Mason, Madison pleaded, "Why at this late hour would you not sign it?" "Because it does not have a Bill of Right." Colonel Mason, "We have not given the federal government enough power to trample our rights." And Mason's answer was classic. "But they will. They always do." This, too, was a concern among the states, and many proposed changes were submitted at the first session of Congress. 12 of the amendments were approved by Congress and submitted to the states. 10 were ratified and became the famous American Bill of Rights. Rights or entitlements? So what do the Democrat Socialists celebrate on such a day as today? They promote and advocate dependence, not independence. Today and tomorrow, my guest is Don Jans, as I was once again reading the history of the men who so bravely dedicated their lives to building a nation. There are a few men I have come acquainted with in this nation through this show that I hold and believe have the spirit of these founders we often speak of. Don Jans is one of these today who perhaps he's not a founder, but is certainly a man of wisdom and striving to educate others and preserve our nation and its independence and our liberty. We're going to share the truth about rights and entitlements. Don, thank you for taking time out to be my guest on this historic day and on the next day. I appreciate it so much that we can do this two-part. Thank you.
What an honor. What a fantastic opening.
Thank you.
I got chills as we were going through it, and then to be even mentioned in the same sentence as those founders.
You know, Don,
I am really, really humbled.
Well,
thank you so much, Beth.
You're more than welcome. You every time we talk, I learn something, and I appreciate it so very much. And we were actually, when I was visiting with Don, talking about a show he's going to be on with me here in a couple of weeks. And I got to thinking, well, you know what? Why don't you just come on with me July 4th and let's talk about this? And he's got a passion. And we started off, of course, you know, we've watched these debates and we've watched these candidates and we've watched Democrats, and they're all talking about what everybody has the right to this. It's a human right to that. And it goes on. And Don was talking to me about these rights and entitlements. And I'm going to kind of turn it over to you for a moment and just have you explain to the listeners what rights really are.
Thanks. What you went through in the opening, I am sure many, 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 many Americans have never heard. I am sure many, many, many Americans have no idea as to what really went into our founding. You made a couple of comments that really drew my attention, and you talked about God having a hand in our independence. There's a story I want to talk about before I go into the rights and the entitlements.
Absolutely.
When we talk about the United States and the hand of God being involved, we can argue about that, we can debate it, we can go through all these things, but then we have to look at some facts. And the American ragtag army should never, ever have won that war. There's just no way they should have. We were on the brink of defeat so many times. And one of the times that really comes to mind is when Washington had taken his army to Long Island. And we can question whether that was a good move or not. It turned out that it was a turning point in the war to a large extent, in that he was pinned down in the corner of Long Island, right where Brooklyn is. And if you're familiar with that, we know that that's on the harbor, and that there's water all around that area, and that the next day he was going to be defeated, the army was going to be annihilated, and the war would essentially have been over. Not essentially, it would have been over. However, that night a fog comes in, and the fog is such that of course when there's fog you generally don't have any wind, and the ships that the British had were out in the ocean, and they could not come into the harbor to close off any retreat. The fog comes in, and Washington is able to get word over to Manhattan, get everything that will float and get it over. And of course, we heard the story then that Washington and the army, they kept the fires burning, but they started to leave Brooklyn and sail on anything they could and go across the harbor. To the point where they get down, it's about 7 o'clock and they're still not done. And generally, the fogs will lift early in the morning. It didn't. It didn't lift until roughly noon, and it lifted shortly after Washington and his horse stepped onto one of these vehicles that would allow him to also go to safety. What happened there, Beth Ann, and I wish people would read that story, what happened there was so much in favor of the American soldiers, of the American colonists, and the different things that came about, that you can only come to the conclusion that the divine hand of God played a role in that escape. It's a marvelous story.
Oh, it's absolutely
and it gives
marvelous.
you the confidence and the faith that yes, God did have a hand for us. And it takes us to where we start into entitlements and rights. We were founded on the basis in the Declaration of Independence, where we are told that we are endowed by our Creator. Who's our Creator?
God.
Creator is God. That we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, rights that can't be taken from us, rights that can't be maneuvered, rights that can't be manipulated. And amongst these rights are the rights, Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, the rights to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. He puts a phrase in front of that, and he says, these rights are amongst our inalienable rights. So he's implying at that point in time that there are other rights as well. But these are the main rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, or the pursuit of happiness. Now, when we read or when we listen to Sam Adams back in 1772, Sam Adams quotes John Locke directly, and John Locke is the one who began this idea of rights coming from God and not from government. And John Adams said, John Locke said these rights were life, liberty, and property. What Jefferson did is he extended that concept of property so it wouldn't just mean land or houses or tangible properties, but it would also be extended into the rights that we as individuals have to pursue our own happiness, to have the type of career we wish to have a career, to have a life that's not dictated by our birth, because in those days you were born a noble or you were born a commoner, or some phrase or some part thereof, and that dictated who you were and what you were. So our rights came from our Creator, not from government, not from man, and the only purpose of government, other than to protect us from outside forces, is to protect those rights. Now we get into what's an entitlement. An entitlement was never, ever mentioned in any of our founding documents. And I say our founding documents, I mean the Declaration, I mean the Constitution, I mean the Bill of Rights. You never, ever, ever, ever find anything relating to or talking about entitlements. That's not to say they weren't discussed.
Oh.
When we read the history, we understand that they were things like that were discussed, and Jefferson came out and he told us, he said, democracy will cease to exist when we take from those who would work and give to those who would not.
And we see that happening
Jefferson,
today. We're going into a break, Dawn, and when we come back, I want you to finish talking about that. And now I'm going to want to go through these Bill of Rights, and we're going to talk about the rights versus the entitlements in that. I appreciate that. You're listening to CSC Talk Radio. This is Beth Ann, and I'm visiting with Dawn Jans, and we will be right back.